Viria floated alone in the cold, infinite blackness of space. The stars twinkled all around her, distant and unreachable, but they offered no warmth, no comfort. She had been cast out, abandoned by her own family. The alien ship that had once carried her from planet to planet, offering luxury and status, had left her stranded. No one cared to look back. To them, she was nothing more than a broken tool, discarded and forgotten. Her heart ached with the knowledge that her very existence was deemed worthless. As HFY, she had been born into a powerful family, one that valued perfection above all else. Her species had little patience for flaws. Viria's mistake had been simple, a genetic error. She hadn't been born with the exact traits her family demanded. It wasn't enough to simply be intelligent, strong, and capable. No, she had to be perfect, and she wasn't. So they threw her away as easily as someone would discard a piece of old machinery. Floating in the deep void of space, her thoughts were consumed by anger and pain. How could they do this to her? She had tried so hard to live up to their impossible standards, but it was never enough. She had been raised to believe she was special, that her bloodline meant something. But in the end, she was just another failure. The silence around her was deafening. She had no way to contact anyone. Her communication devices had been disabled the moment they abandoned her. Her food supplies had long run out, and her life support system was beginning to fail. She felt a sharp pang of hunger, but she knew that she wouldn't survive long enough to feel its full sting. Yet, even in her hopelessness, a small part of her refused to give in. The human part of her, her heart, her ability to hope, to fight against the odds, wasn't completely gone. She remembered stories from the past, stories her family had told her about humans. The HFY had always viewed humanity as weak, savage even. But there had been a time when Viria had heard whispers about humans being different. They were resilient, they were passionate, and they were capable of acts of extraordinary kindness. Could they be real? Her mind returned to the present. She didn't know how much longer she could last, but she knew one thing for certain. If she were going to die, it would not be in the cold, unfeeling expanse of space. She would find a way out, or someone would find her. Perhaps the humans, with their strange ways, would come to her rescue. It seemed like a foolish hope, but it was the only thing that kept her from slipping into despair. Just as she was about to give in to the cold numbness threatening to overtake her, her comms suddenly flickered to life. It was weak at first, just a blip of static, but then a voice, deep and steady, broke through the interference. "This is Commander Ethan Carter of the Aegis Dawn. Respond if you can hear me." The voice was human. Viria's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, trying to focus on the faint signal, unsure if it was real or just a hallucination. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to let go and accept her fate. But another part, her heart, that human part, urged her to respond. She managed to tap the controls on her console, struggling to keep her hand steady. She sent out a weak distress signal, praying that the human ship would find her. Moments passed. It felt like hours. She wanted to scream in frustration, to yell at the stars that had never answered her. But then, there it was again, the voice. "Viria, we've received your signal. We're coming to get you." Her breath caught in her throat. They were coming. She was not alone. For the first time since her abandonment, she felt a spark of something that felt like hope. Maybe humans weren't so different after all. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely worthless. The Aegis Dawn wasn't much, a small, unassuming freighter, but it was her lifeline now. Through the cracks in the ship's hull, Viria could see a shadow moving, and her hope swelled. Could this be the beginning of something more than survival? Could a human truly be the one to save her? Time felt like it slowed as she waited for the human ship to reach her. But as the blips of a new signal on her display began to grow stronger, she felt something else. Maybe she wasn't the only one searching for something. Maybe humanity had their own ways of defying the odds, just like her. She wasn't sure what came next, but one thing was certain. This encounter would change everything. And for the first time in a long time, Viria allowed herself to believe. The coldness of space slowly faded as the ship drew closer. Viria could barely believe it, but she was alive. She had sent her signal out into the void, and someone had heard it. The human voice on the comms was real. She tried to keep her mind focused, but emotions, strange, foreign emotions, began to stir in her chest. She was nervous, scared even, but there was a small spark of hope, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The Aegis Dawn was a ship unlike any Viria had ever seen. It was rugged, built for survival rather than elegance, but that only made it more comforting to her in that moment. As the ship's engines hummed steadily, she could hear the sound of footsteps approaching from behind the hatch. Viria's breath hitched. Could this be real? She turned to face the door, unsure of what to expect. The hatch opened slowly, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, with short, dark hair and sharp, kind eyes. His uniform, simple but well-worn, marked him as a captain. Commander Ethan Carter, the man who had spoken to her over the comms. "Are you all right?" Ethan's voice was calm, his face serious but not unkind. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a kind curiosity. His presence was grounding, reassuring. He wasn't looking at her like a broken thing, like her people had done. He was treating her like a person. Viria hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to this kind of treatment. The Auxiliary didn't show kindness, especially not to those who were considered failures. But there was something different about this man. Something human. I think so," she said softly, surprised at how weak her own voice sounded. It had been so long since she had spoken to anyone. Her words felt like they barely made it past her lips. Ethan gave a small, reassuring smile. "Don't worry, you're safe now. Let's get you something to eat, and we'll figure everything out." Viria's eyes widened. Safe? A part of her didn't understand. How could she be safe? She had been thrown away by her family, cast out like an unwanted object. But here was a human, a stranger, offering her help without asking for anything in return. Her stomach growled, loudly. The small sound made her feel embarrassed. She hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer, but she didn't want to show weakness. The Auxiliary had taught her to hide any vulnerability. Yet, in front of Ethan, there was no reason to be ashamed. "Come on, let's get you to the galley," Ethan said with a gentle nudge. "You must be starving." Viria followed him down the narrow corridors of the Aegis Dawn, feeling the weight of exhaustion finally begin to settle in her bones. She had never been in a ship like this before. It was smaller than the sleek, sophisticated vessels of the Auxiliary, but it had something those ships lacked, a sense of life. The walls were worn and scratched, but there were also personal touches, small items that told the story of the crew. The walls weren't sterile. They were lived in. As they entered the galley, Viria's eyes took in the simple yet welcoming space. The smell of food filled the air, something hearty, something warm. Ethan motioned for her to sit at the small table, and she did so hesitantly. She wasn't used to being treated with such care. Most of the time, people saw her as a burden. But here, in this tiny, humble kitchen, Ethan seemed to see her as something more. He returned with a bowl of what appeared to be stew. It looked simple, nothing like the refined dishes the Auxiliary served, but it smelled good. She wasn't sure if her stomach could handle it, but she didn't care. For the first time in a long time, the idea of food felt comforting. "Go ahead," Ethan said with a small grin. "I promise it's not going to bite." Viria looked at the bowl in her hands. She didn't know what to do with the strange sensation welling up inside her. Was it gratitude? Could humans make her feel this way? She had always been told that humans were nothing but wild, unpredictable creatures. But Ethan wasn't wild. He was steady. He was kind. Taking a deep breath, she brought the bowl to her lips and tasted the stew. It was nothing like the rich, complex flavors of the Auxiliary delicacies, but it was good. It was exactly what she needed. Warm, filling, simple. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange to her. She wasn't sure if she had ever truly thanked anyone before, not in the way humans did. But there was something in her heart now, something she couldn't ignore. Ethan nodded, watching her with a soft smile. "You don't have to thank me. Just rest. We're going to help you, Varia. You're not alone anymore." Her heart clenched. Was it possible? Could it be true? She had spent so long convincing herself that no one would ever care about her, that she was destined to drift through space alone. But here, in this small, humble ship, a human had shown her more compassion in a few moments than her entire species had in her lifetime. Varia didn't know what her future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of something. Hope. Hope, a word that had once seemed so foreign to her. Maybe the humans weren't so weak after all. Maybe they were stronger than she had ever imagined. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Varia spent the next few days aboard the Aegis Dawn, slowly recovering from the shock of her abandonment. Each day felt like a new discovery, not just of the ship and its crew, but of herself. The humans, despite their strange ways, treated her with something she had never experienced before: respect. They didn't see her as broken as her family had. They saw her as a person. Commander Ethan Carter, the man who had rescued her, was always there, quietly offering help without asking for anything in return. He would sit with her, teaching her things she hadn't known about humans. She learned that they laughed at the smallest things, even in the darkest of times. She was baffled by it at first. How could they laugh when everything seemed so uncertain, so fragile? But then she began to understand. It wasn't the situation that caused the laughter. It was a way of fighting against the overwhelming darkness that sometimes crept into their lives. Humor was their shield. Ethan had also introduced her to the rest of the crew. There was Samira, a quick-witted mechanic with a knack for making anything work, even when it seemed impossible. Samira's hands were always busy, either tinkering with the ship's engines or finding ways to improve their equipment. She didn't judge Varia for her past or her perceived weaknesses. Instead, Samira treated her as a new friend, teaching her about the ship and how it operated. Then there was Jace, the ship's engineer. He had a quiet, thoughtful demeanor and spent most of his time in the lower levels of the ship, fixing things and making sure everything ran smoothly. Jace's approach to life seemed to be all about balance. He believed that every problem had a solution, even if it took time to find it. Varia admired him, though she often found his calm demeanor hard to understand. Silari were never calm. They were always analyzing, calculating, and pushing for the next step. The last member of the crew was Orion, the ship's eye. While Orion wasn't human, he had a presence that felt almost like one of the crew. He interacted with Varia in a way that was both informative and oddly comforting. The A's soft voice would often pop up over the ship's intercom, guiding her when she needed it or simply offering advice on how to navigate the ship's complicated systems. Orion's understanding of the universe seemed limitless, and yet he never made Varia feel small. Despite all their kindness, Varia couldn't help but feel like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She wasn't like them. Her people, the Xilari, valued perfection, efficiency, and control. She had been raised to believe that emotions were distractions, to feel meant to fail. The Xilari had taught her to suppress everything, to focus only on logic and reason. Yet here, aboard this small ship with humans who seemed to embrace their feelings rather than hide them, she was forced to confront something she had never allowed herself to acknowledge: her own emotions. The first time she felt it, she didn't know what to call it. It happened during a quiet dinner in the galley. The crew was telling stories, laughing at the silly things that had happened to them over the years. Even Varia found herself smiling at their jokes, though she didn't completely understand them. Then, Samira started telling a story about a time she'd gotten stuck in the maintenance ducts of the ship for hours because she had been too stubborn to ask for help. Samira's laughter filled the room, and everyone joined in, even Orion, whose voice had a hint of amusement. And in that moment, something inside Viriya shifted. The laughter, it wasn't just noise. It was a way of connecting, a way of sharing something real. For the first time, she didn't feel so alone. She realized that the humans had something she didn't, something she couldn't quite name but deeply desired. It was the ability to feel without fear. Later that evening, after the crew had retired to their respective quarters, Viriya sat alone in the galley, staring out at the stars. She thought about what Samira had said during dinner. You can't fix everything, Viriya. Sometimes you just have to let it go and laugh. It's okay to not be perfect. Her mind raced with the thought, letting go. It felt so foreign, so unlike everything she had been taught. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized Samira was right. The Exilari valued perfection to the point of destruction. They demanded that nothing was out of place, that nothing was messy. But here, among humans, messes seemed to be part of life. They didn't try to hide their imperfections, they embraced them. And in doing so, they found joy. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Could she learn to let go of the need for control? Could she allow herself to feel, to laugh, to experience life as humans did, without constantly judging herself? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing: being around the humans was changing her. Slowly but surely, they were teaching her that there was more to life than perfection. As Viriya lay in her quarters that night, staring up at the dim ceiling, she found herself thinking about her past, about her family. She had always been told that the Xelari were the superior species, that their way was the only way. But now, in the silence of her room, she questioned everything she had ever believed. Maybe the humans, with their messy, imperfect lives, had figured something out that the Xelari never could. And for the first time, she felt a small spark of hope. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she didn't have to be perfect to be worthy of something good. She could be her true self, flaws, feelings, and all. And that was enough. Viriya's newfound sense of belonging aboard the Aegis Dawn was short-lived. Though she had begun to find peace in the company of Ethan and his crew, the shadows of her past were never far behind. It was only a matter of time before the Xelari, her family, her people, would come for her, and they did not show mercy. One quiet evening, while Viriya was sitting with Jace in the engine room, a sharp alarm blared through the ship, piercing the calm. The sudden noise made Viriya's heart race, and she jumped to her feet. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Jace's eyes widened as he rushed to the control panel. "It's a tracker. They found us." He looked up at her with a grim expression. "It's a Xelari warship." Viriya felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. She had hoped, in the deepest part of her heart, that they would forget her, that her family would simply move on. But they never did. The Xelari were a proud, unforgiving species, and they had no place for weakness, especially not one of their own. "Can we outrun them?" Viriya asked, her voice shaking slightly. Jace didn't answer immediately. Instead, he quickly ran a series of diagnostics, his fingers flying across the controls. Finally, he shook his head. "Not with the ship's current speed. They'll catch us unless we do something drastic." Viriya's stomach churned. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The Xelari were ruthless. They wouldn't stop until she was returned to them, alive, or more likely, dead. She knew that the moment they boarded, they would consider her an example of failure, of imperfection, and they would not allow imperfection to live. As the Aegis Dawn rocked from the force of the warship's approach, Ethan's voice came over the intercom, calm but urgent. "Everyone to the bridge. We need a plan, and we need it now." Viriya hurried to the bridge, her heart pounding in her chest. She entered the room to find the crew gathered around the control panels, their faces serious. Ethan, always the steady leader, was standing in front of the main screen, analyzing the enemy ship's movements. "Are they targeting us?" Viriya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've locked onto us," Ethan said, glancing over at her. "But we've still got some time before they can board. We need to make a decision." Samira was already working on a plan. "We could try to make a run for it. There's a nebula about 30 light years from here, dense enough to hide us. But we'd have to jump quickly, and we'd need to leave a few things behind. The ship won't handle the stress otherwise." Viria listened, but her mind was elsewhere. The Exilari weren't just going to let them escape. She knew how they operated. They were precise, cold, and relentless. They would not stop until she was back in their grasp. "I don't want to bring any more danger to you all," Viria said quietly, her gaze dropping to the floor. "If they find us, they'll destroy the ship. They won't hesitate." Ethan's voice was firm, reassuring. "We're a family now, Viria. And we protect each other. We're not leaving you behind. We'll fight. We'll get through this." Her heart swelled at his words. For the first time, someone had chosen her, not because of her perfection, but because they saw her as valuable, worth saving. Still, the fear gnawed at her. What if they couldn't escape? What if her presence was the cause of their downfall? As the warship drew nearer, Samira quickly began to implement her plan. "If we're going to jump, we need to increase power to the engines. Jace, can you make sure the engines are ready for a quick departure?" Jace nodded without hesitation. "I'll reroute all power to the hyperdrive." The crew moved quickly, each of them taking their assigned tasks with focused determination. Viria, though uncertain of herself, found a strange comfort in their certainty. She may have been the reason they were in danger, but these humans didn't blame her. They just wanted to help her. "Ready when you are," Samira called out. "But we need to jump within the next 2 minutes, or it'll be too late." Viria felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her past was closing in on her, and she wasn't sure if they could outrun it. But she also knew that these humans were not the kind to give up easily. With a deep breath, Ethan turned to her. "Viria, get ready. It's going to be a bumpy ride." As the countdown began, Viria's thoughts raced. Would the nebula hide them long enough? Would they survive? Her family, the Exilari, were powerful, but they had never faced humans before. They had underestimated them, just as they had underestimated her. The ship shook as the engines roared to life. Viria gripped the edge of the console, her body tense as they made their escape. She could hear the warship's engines in the distance, closing in, but she refused to look back. She couldn't. Jumping in 3, 2, 1. The ship lurched violently as the Aegis Dawn leaked into hyperspace, the stars around them stretching into lines as they disappeared into the unknown. For a brief moment, the tension in the air seemed to lift, but Viria knew the danger wasn't over. Her past might have been left behind in the depths of space, but it would always find a way to catch up with her. And she had no idea what the future held. But for now, she was safe. For now, she had a family who would fight for her. The Aegis Dawn drifted through the empty void of space, the crew working together to navigate the treacherous path they had taken. The nebula had provided them with the perfect cover, and the Exilari warship had been unable to track them through the dense clouds of gas and dust. For now, they were safe, but the feeling of uncertainty lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Viria stood by the observation window, watching as the stars outside flickered. The ship's quiet hum was the only sound filling the room. She had always been alone, alone in her thoughts, alone in her struggles. But here, in the company of these humans, she was beginning to understand what it meant to be part of something bigger. Yet even as she tried to embrace that feeling, she couldn't ignore the fear that still held her tightly. The Exilari were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to capture her. Ethan found her there, standing in silence, gazing out into the vastness of space. He had noticed how quiet she had become since they had escaped the Exilari warship. The calm, collected woman he had come to know seemed distant now, almost lost in thought. He approached her carefully, sensing the weight of her mind. "Viria," he said gently. "You okay?" She turned toward him, her eyes betraying the storm of emotions swirling inside. "I'm fine," she replied softly, though her voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. "Just thinking." Ethan didn't push her. He knew better than to ask too many questions when someone wasn't ready to talk. But he wasn't going to let her shut herself off completely. "We're safe for now. We made it through. You don't need to carry all of this alone, you know." Viria's eyes dropped to the floor, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. The truth was, she didn't know how to let others help her. She had spent her entire life learning to stand alone, to rely only on herself. The HFY had raised her to be strong, to be independent, to never show weakness. The idea of relying on anyone else felt strange, even terrifying. Yet the kindness of Ethan and the others made her wonder if maybe she didn't have to carry this burden by herself anymore. "I never wanted to be a burden to you," she whispered. "You didn't sign up for this. I didn't choose this life." Ethan's expression softened. He understood more than she realized. No one chooses the life they're given, Viria. But that doesn't mean you have to face it alone. We're a team. You're part of this crew now. Her heart tightened at his words, and she found herself fighting the urge to tear up. She had never been told anything like this before. The HFY had always expected her to be perfect, to be without flaw. The idea that she could be accepted despite her imperfections was both a relief and a fear she couldn't quite understand. "I don't know how to be part of a team," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been part of anything like that." "You're learning," Ethan replied with a reassuring smile. "We all are. None of us are perfect. But together, we can handle whatever comes our way." Viria nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully believed him. She wanted to, more than anything, but the weight of her past was heavy. The HFY had raised her to be strong, but they had also raised her to believe that emotions were weaknesses. The thought of accepting help, of trusting others, felt like a betrayal of everything she had been taught. Just then, the ship's comm system crackled to life. It was Samira, her voice filled with urgency. "We've got trouble. We've been detected. Another ship just entered the nebula, bigger than the last one. It's another HFY warship." Viria's stomach dropped. She didn't need to hear more. The HFY had found them again. It had only been a matter of time. "How long until they reach us?" she asked, her voice steady despite the panic threatening to rise inside her. "Too soon," Samira replied. "We need to move now. They'll be on top of us before we know it." Ethan turned to Viria, his expression serious. "We don't have much time. We need to make another jump, and we need to do it fast. Can you help us, Viria?" For a moment, she froze. The fear of being caught, of being taken back to the HFY, gripped her tightly. But she couldn't let that fear control her. Not now. Not when her new family was in danger because of her. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She wasn't going to let them down. "I'll do whatever I can," she said, determination hardening her voice. She wasn't sure how much help she could be, but she wouldn't sit back and let the crew fight her battles for her. She had learned something important in the days she had spent with these humans. She wasn't weak just because she had feelings, and she wasn't powerless because of her past. Ethan gave her a nod, his eyes filled with pride. "All right, let's make this jump and get out of here." As the crew scrambled to prepare for another escape, Viria felt a strange calm settle over her. The weight of her past still hung heavy, but she was no longer alone. She had a family now, and they would face this together. The ship's engines roared to life once more, and Viria held on tight, knowing that this time, the HFY wouldn't get to take her without a fight. She was no longer just a tool to be discarded. She was part of something much bigger, a family that would protect her no matter what. And for the first time, she believed she could protect them too. The Aegis Dawn shook violently as the second HFY warship closed in. The crew scrambled, preparing for another desperate escape. Viria, her heart racing, knew the situation was growing more dire by the second. This time, there would be no easy getaway. They couldn't outrun the Xilari. The odds were against them, but she wasn't going to let fear control her. "Samira, is the jump ready?" Ethan's voice rang out from the cockpit as he worked furiously on the controls. "Almost." Samira's voice crackled through the comms, filled with tension. "I'm adjusting the hyperdrive settings for a quick jump, but it's going to be tricky. We need to jump within the next minute, or we'll be caught." The ship trembled again, this time from a burst of energy from the enemy ship's weapons. Viria could see the flash of light through the cockpit's viewports. They were getting closer. The Xilari had already started firing morning shots, testing the ship's defenses. "We don't have much time," Viria muttered under her breath. She could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her, but she shook it off. The Xilari might be coming for her, but she wasn't going down without a fight. She wouldn't let them take her back. Ethan turned to Viria, his expression fierce. "Viria, you've learned how to work the ship's systems, right? I need you to help us keep their weapons off our backs. You've got knowledge of Xilari tech. Can you hack into their systems and slow them down?" Her heart skipped a beat. The Xilari technology was advanced, but she had grown up with it. She had studied it, even helped design some of it. If anyone could find a way in, it was her. Still, the thought of facing her own people, the ones who had trained her, made her stomach churn. They would not hesitate to destroy her, but Viria knew she had to act quickly. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her mind. "I can do it. Just give me access to their communication systems." Without another word, she moved to the terminal beside Ethan and began to work. Her fingers flew across the keys as she accessed the Xilari warship systems, bypassing their security protocols with ease. It felt strange, though, using her knowledge against her own people. For years, she had been trained to be their perfect soldier, their perfect tool. Now she was using that very training to stop them. "Viria, how much longer?" Samira's voice came through, strained. The Xilari ship was drawing closer, and the tension in the air was palpable. "I'm in," Viria said, focusing all of her attention on the task at hand. "I've got access to their weapons systems. I can slow them down for a while, but not for long." "Do what you can," Ethan ordered. "We need that jump." Viria's mind raced as she worked, her fingers moving faster than ever before. The Xilari were a dangerous force, and their weapons were designed to tear through anything in their path. But she knew their systems, every weakness, every flaw. She found a vulnerability in their targeting system and quickly exploited it, causing their weapons to misfire. "There," she said, looking up at Ethan. "I've delayed their weapons for a few minutes. That should give us enough time to escape." Ethan gave her a quick nod. "Good work, Viria. Now let's make that jump." Just as Samira shouted, "Hyperdrive's ready," a massive explosion rocked the ship, sending everyone tumbling as the Aegis Dawn shook violently. The Xilari had fired, this time with deadly accuracy. A powerful blast struck the ship's hull, rattling it to its core. "Shields are holding, but we've taken damage," Samira reported, her voice filled with urgency. "We can't take another hit like that." The crew was scrambling, working together to keep the ship intact, but the situation was growing more critical by the second. The Xilari were relentless. "We need to jump, now," Ethan shouted, his voice filled with determination. "No more delays." Viria didn't hesitate. She had done her part, but now it was time to trust the others. She moved quickly to the navigation controls, helping Samira input the coordinates for their jump. The Xilari ship was closing in fast, and they had only seconds to make the leap. "Ready, Viria?" Ethan asked, his eyes meeting hers. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ready." With a final press of a button, Samira activated the hyperdrive, and the Aegis Dawn leaped into hyperspace just as another barrage of energy slammed into their rear shields. The ship lurched as they crossed the threshold of the jump, the stars outside stretching into streaks of light as they sped away from danger. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. The chaos of the past few minutes seemed to fade away as the ship sailed through the unknown, away from the Exilari and the danger they posed. But Viria knew this wasn't over. The Exilari wouldn't give up easily. They would follow. They would find them. Ethan walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression steady. "We made it through. You did good, Viria." Viria looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't feel like the same person who had first boarded the Aegis Dawn. She had faced the shadows of her past and fought back. She had helped her new family survive. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. And no matter what came next, she wasn't going to let fear control her. The Exilari could chase her, but they would never break her. She was done being the perfect weapon. She was human now, and nothing was going to take that away from her. The Aegis Dawn glided smoothly through the vast emptiness of space, the crew weary but relieved. The damage from the last battle had been repaired, and though their journey was far from over, the tension that had plagued them for so long had finally begun to ease. Viria stood by the observation window once more, her eyes fixed on the stars, lost in thought. She had never imagined her life would turn out like this. The last few days had been a whirlwind of danger, decisions, and growth. She had faced the Exilari, her own people, and come out the other side not just surviving, but stronger. And with each passing moment, she had come to realize that the crew of the Aegis Dawn wasn't just a group of strangers thrown together by chance. They were her family now, and that was something she had never known she could have. Ethan approached quietly, as he often did, his steady presence a constant comfort to her. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. Viria turned to him, offering a small but genuine smile. "I'm getting used to it," she said softly. "The quiet, the safety. It's a strange feeling." "I know the feeling," Ethan replied, his eyes meeting hers. "We're not used to it either, but it's starting to feel like home, isn't it?" Viria nodded, her smile widening. For the first time in her life, she could see a future where she wasn't being hunted, where she wasn't an outcast. The Exilari might still be out there, still searching for her, but for now, she had found something worth protecting. "I've never had a home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, not a real one. "But here, with all of you, it's different." Ethan's expression softened. "You've always had a home, Viria. You just didn't know it yet." Viria didn't know how to respond. The words he said resonated with her, but they also felt foreign. It was hard to imagine belonging to something, to someone, after a lifetime of being seen as nothing more than a tool to be used. The Exilari had taught her to be strong, to never show weakness, to never let anyone close. But Ethan and the others were showing her something she had never known. They were showing her what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself. "I still don't feel like I deserve it," she admitted, her voice tight with emotion. "I've done things I'm not proud of." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "None of us are perfect, but that's not what makes us family. It's about sticking together when things get tough, supporting each other no matter what. You've done that. You've fought for all of us." Viria felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her still felt like she didn't belong, that she wasn't worthy of the love and care they were showing her. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling the weight of those words more than ever. Just then, the ship's intercom buzzed, and Samira's voice came through. "We've arrived at the new coordinates. We're in a safe zone for now, but we should keep our guard up. It's not exactly a peaceful area." Viria straightened up, her mind instantly shifting back to the reality they faced. The fight wasn't over. The Exilari were still out there, and they would continue to search for her. But now she had a choice. She could either hide and run forever, or she could stand tall and fight for the family she had come to love. "We should get to the briefing room," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Samira's got some intel on our next move. We need to plan carefully." The crew gathered in the briefing room, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Viria took her seat beside Ethan, her mind focused on the task ahead. She had come a long way since the first day she boarded the Aegis Dawn. She had gone from being a broken, discarded tool to a fighter, a protector, and a leader. "We've got a few options," Samira said, pulling up a map of the surrounding systems. "We could hide out here for a while, wait for the Exilari to lose track of us. Or we could hit back, make a stand and show them we're not afraid to fight." There was a moment of silence as the crew considered their options. The tension was thick in the air, but it wasn't the same kind of fear they had felt before. This time, they were ready. They had survived the worst of it, and now they were ready to make a real choice about their future. "We've come this far together," Jace said, breaking the silence. "And I'm not about to let some Silari worship chase us around forever. We stand our ground, we fight for what's ours." Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting Viria's. "We fight for each other. We fight for our family." Viria felt a surge of something, pride, courage, hope, rising in her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting for something greater. She was fighting for the people she cared about, the people who had become her family. "We'll fight," she said, her voice clear and strong. "For all of us." The crew exchanged nods of agreement, their resolve unshaken. They weren't just running anymore. They were standing tall, ready to face whatever came their way, together. And as the Aegis Dawn sailed into the unknown, Viria knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, she was no longer alone. She had a family now. And that was something worth fighting for. The stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter as the ship surged forward into the endless void. A new chapter had begun, a chapter of hope, a chapter of courage, and above all, a chapter of freedom.